certain sectors of the economy have gone to zero.
We are struggling big time.
We are more worried about what's going to happen to the business than we are about catching the virus.
It's massive. Entire industries are shutting down.
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Now, the top priority during this coronavirus outbreak is, of course, to save lives. But after that, for many people, it's about saving their businesses. And that's why, on today's program, we're going to be focusing on the self-employed men and women struggling to adapt to this crisis. We're going to be hearing from America's best boss, Dan Price, who's in Seattle. We'll also talk with Vicky Pryce, an economist who helped the UK government during the last great financial crisis. And we'll hear from a personal trainer who's had to swap the gym for a laptop. But first, let's look at the big picture and a quick look around the world at what governments are doing to help people save their businesses.
We're fighting an invisible enemy.
We must act and do whatever it takes to support our economy.
It's massive. Entire industries are shutting down.
We are struggling big time.
We are honestly more worried about what's going to happen to the business than we are about catching the virus.
75% drop in trade.
Fantastic British companies already under huge strain. We in government say we will stand by you.
The government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages.
£330 billion of guarantees.
$82 billion in support.
$189 billion.
300 milliards d'euros.
We're working urgently with Congress on legislation to support the millions of workers.
The coronavirus is slowing our economy to a near standstill.
$1 trillion attempt to rescue the American economy.
Centerpiece would be those cash payments or tax rebates of $1,000 or more that would get sent to hard-hit American workers right away.
Our goal is to get relief to Americans as quickly as possible so that families can get by and small businesses can keep workers on the payroll.
See our economy skyrocket once this is over. It's going to be a tremendous day when we defeat this horrible, invisible enemy.
Well, President Trump there at the tail end of that report, looking forward to better days and a booming economy. But right now, it's important for businesses just to stay alive. So let's get some advice from our guests. Let's start with Dan Price. He's the CEO of a credit card payments company in Seattle. Second time you're on the show, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us again on The Nexus. Your company works with some 20,000 small companies, as you describe them, mom and pop businesses. I really need to ask you, how many of those businesses are at risk of going bust imminently?
I mean, basically all of them. There are some that will weather this storm better, and there are a few that are even benefiting if they just happen to be lucky enough to be in some type of an industry that's necessary in this crisis. But the fact is that independent businesses have been squeezed for a long time. Their share of the profit has fallen, and huge companies have really been taking over that space. And so these mom and pop businesses were already under a lot of pressure. They were already under a lot of stress. Now they have no customers for 2-3 weeks. It's a matter of days now, really, before many of them will have to close their doors. And I hear every day of people fighting for their business, trying to survive. And it's really heartbreaking.
That is really incredibly sad. Let's take a look at the measures announced by President Trump, who agreed that big package with Congress. Let's take a look at some of the numbers, Dan, if you could crunch them with me. We've got a package that the US media is reporting is at something like $2 trillion. Here's where some of that money's going. Checks of $1,200 will be sent to individuals who earn less than $75,000 a year. A married couple earning less than $150,000 a year can expect checks of around $2,400, plus $500 per child. Now, those payments account for around $250 billion of the package, around 14% of the overall rescue package. $350 billion will be made available to small businesses as loans, so long as they keep their employees and they don't fire them. And around $500 billion is to provide loans to distressed companies, including $50 billion for airlines. Now, Dan, I know you're very against the airlines getting any kind of additional support on top of what they had before. We'll get to that in a second. But just these payments to individuals, I think that's something you can get behind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to give a better social safety net to people in general. And one thing that this virus has highlighted is that we're all in it together. So if we cast aside people, if we don't give people the right opportunities to grow and to succeed, it's going to hurt all of us. And that's really what we've done. And I can absolutely get behind the $1,200 payment. I think it needs to be quite a bit higher. I'm worried about a $75,000 cap because I think some people are in expensive places or have bills that they have set up to pay. So I think we need to lessen the restrictions on the part of the bill that applies to small businesses and workers. And I think we need to greatly increase the restrictions on the part of the bill that bails out Wall Street and huge companies.
Right. The $350 billion that's going to be made available to small businesses in the form of loans, is that going to help your clients?
You know, it really remains to be seen. There's a lot of questions. We've been working through this with several of our clients who have told us that for 4, 5, 6 days, they can't get their loan application through the system because it's so jammed up. Now this package gets introduced, and unless that gets shored up, unless we really make it a priority to have the accessibility to those small businesses, it'll be too little too late. And I worry a little bit about the loan part of it. I think we need to think about maybe a grant or more loan forgiveness, having some type of structure so that those who were caught in the crosshairs of all this don't go away and deprive all of us of what that business is providing to our community.
Now, airlines in the United States, like airlines all over the world, are naturally suffering because people are in lockdown. They can't travel. They're in big trouble. Some people would argue they deserve this additional help. Why are you against it?
Well, it's really a larger issue here, which is about stock buybacks and the idea of taking money and giving it to shareholders. Stock buybacks and other forms of manipulation, leverage buyouts, basically what they do is they take all the resources of a company and they take them away from the company, give them to the shareholders, which increases the stock price, and it makes the executive team rich, but it leaves the company without enough resources to take care of their people and to weather a storm like this. And so I'm not necessarily against making some adjustments and helping some of these companies, but then we need to have accountability of no sales of shares for leverage buyouts, no stock buybacks. If there's just going to be a sense of taking this money and giving it to Wall Street, giving it to wealthy investors, it's really counterproductive. And unfortunately, this is what these airlines have done over and over again.
Dan, just briefly, do you think that this stimulus package, the way that the government is handling the crisis this time round compared to just over a decade ago, is a better approach than the approach that was taken back in the great financial crisis of 2008, 9, and so on?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions that still remain to be answered, but I think so far the focus on sending individual checks to people and having at least part of the package be dedicated to small businesses is a huge improvement. I think it'll depend on how it's administered. We need to be very strict when we're administering this to wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations, and we need to be very generous when we're thinking about how to administer it to individuals and small businesses.
Dan, stay with us. We're going to come back to you in a moment, but let's just turn quickly to the United Kingdom. And you know that pretty much everyone, apart from key workers, have been told to stay home. And to ensure that they do, the government has closed down almost all non-essential businesses. Inevitably, some will not be able to pay their employees, so the government has promised to pay 80% of their monthly wages, to a maximum of $3,000 a month, approximately. Here's the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Today, I can announce that for the first time in our history, the government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages.
Let's hear from Vicky Price now, an economist who advised the UK government during the great financial crisis around the 2008 mark. Vicky, we've heard the Chancellor of the Exchequer announcing a raft of measures to make sure that the UK economy doesn't go deep into recession. What did you make of the measures, and will they be enough?
The question is whether they're going to be enough. We won't know for a while, because much depends on how long this crisis lasts. So, what the scientists come up with and so on. But what the Chancellor had to do, helped, of course, by the Bank of England as well, which put huge amounts of liquidity into the system, is to reassure the markets that he's there and willing to support. And he did say himself that he will do whatever it takes to get the economy out of this and support not just businesses, but also the population who are losing their jobs. So it is a combined fiscal and monetary package that they've devised together. And I think that's absolutely the right way to go. It is going to be very, very costly. And where it's going to lead...
It is. And I want to ask you whether you think the UK government has the right approach, or would you like to contrast that with what the United States has announced, which is going, the government there is going to actually send checks directly to people of around, $1,200, depending on their circumstances?
Well, we may need to get to that point as well in the UK, because there are loads and loads of self-employed who haven't so far received any help, or at least no indication of that. Very little, actually, except improving slightly the welfare system so they can get a bit more if they go to the sort of local office, which might be handing them some cash to survive. What has happened is that there's been a lot of support for the employed, or those who might be losing their jobs, who work for firms, but there are 5 million people who would be losing their livelihoods completely. So they may well get some sort of check, some sort of reimbursement during this period. So it may not be terribly different to what the US is doing.
Now, governments around the world are trying similar measures to prevent a recession, but you believe that there's no chance of preventing a recession. And if I just have a look here at some of the leading investment banks, they are predicting in the second quarter that GDP will shrink in the United States by as much as 30%, in China 44%, the United Kingdom by 22%, and the Eurozone by 15%. I've never heard of numbers like this in my life. Can you explain how bad things are going to get based on these predictions?
Well, it's considerably worse than what we saw in the financial crisis. The reason why there's likely to be such a big drop in GDP is because we are constraining right now both the supply, because we're stopping people from going to work, and the demand, because basically people are losing their jobs, and also they won't have very many places where they can actually spend their money. So it is a double hit. We didn't see quite that at the time of the financial crisis, and I think that's what's going to be bringing this very sharp decline. The financial crisis took quite some time for countries to get over the problems that they got. Some countries really, really suffered for years to come. The hope now is that this particular crisis will not last that long. The problem is we just don't know how long it will last.
After that initial contraction, enormous contraction, surely it can't go on like that quarter after quarter.
No, well, it could. There have been countries which have suffered year after year after year. I mean, Greece, between 2008 and 2016, saw a continuous fall in GDP every year. But of course, it's not sustainable in the sense that it's going to completely deplete all resources. So the question is, how will countries manage to survive if that is the case? Because they're going to have to borrow an awful lot in order to help the population during the crisis. So, obviously, if this carries on for a very long period of time, I have no idea how we'll get out of this.
Now, Vicky, you were in the UK's National Economic Council officials group. If you were back in that position today fighting this crisis, what would you advise would be the top measures to implement now?
I would say you've absolutely got to keep companies going, or at least give them some guarantees. You have to throw all the money, don't know what's going to stick. We didn't know then, and we still don't know now. But if we end this whole crisis, come out of it, and then we have no viable companies left, then I think rebuilding that is going to be so difficult. So I think that's the first priority, and it is to give people the confidence that when we come out of it, we're going to be growing again, rather than have a very long period of depression from which they can't see, how, in fact, we'll emerge from it.
Well, Vicky, thank you very much for your analysis here on the Nexus. Appreciate it. Thank you. Now, so far, as Vicky mentioned, the British government support is primarily for those who are actually employees. But self-employed people, well, there are 5 million of them in the UK. They're still wondering if they're going to get any support. That might be resolved in the coming days. They make up around 15% of the workforce. Let's hear from some of them.
It's had a huge impact on us. At the moment, we're probably 90-95% down in work to what it was before. I have 4 young children, okay? I have elderly parents. I haven't seen my mother for 2 weeks. Why? Because of this coronavirus. Now, I don't want to be out here taking the risk of being infected from somebody, but I've got no choice. You know, if I don't come out, I can't. How am I meant to pay my bills? How am I meant to feed my children?
So what happens if this carries on like this for another month?
Homelessness.
Really? Do you have any other plans?
No.
Any backup, any savings, nothing? This is it. So if this doesn't work out, then
That's when things get really interesting.
We are open just because to serve our local community. We have to run our business because of the rent and stuff like that. That's the only reason we are open. So I hope everything goes well soon and everything will be fine, you know, so everyone will have a good time.
Okay, let's bring in Peter Bannister now, a personal trainer in London, where all the gyms are closed, of course, and also Gail Smith, a florist, also from London. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with Peter Bannister. Peter, you normally train your clients in a gym. They're all closed.
That's correct, yeah.
So what are you doing to keep your business afloat?
I'm trying to use an online platform so that people can access me online. I'm offering detailed plans out to people, but it's really a piecemeal job at the moment because everybody's in such a state of shock.
Yeah. Tell us about the day you went into your gym. I understand it's one of a big chain. And tell us how they told you it's all over for now.
I will assume that it was like many others going in for a normal day. Everybody was expecting a lockdown. Everybody had heard through some kind of grapevine that there was meant to be a shutdown of business that evening. And that afternoon, we were told that we could no longer practice. From there, we had to vacate the building, take equipment, take anything that we could, and hope that within the next 72 hours that something changed.
And because essentially you're in the gig economy, that gym doesn't owe you anything.
Absolutely zero. In fact, we rent, like many trainers and conditioning coaches, we rent that space from them. So we to them are a great commodity, yet we have zero presence and zero reward from them in this instance.
And Gail Smith, you're a florist in London. You would normally provide flowers for big events, for big corporate clients. What happened to your business?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, my business sort of finished quite a while ago now, 3 weeks. Basically, my whole calendar just got cancelled. People weren't travelling and they weren't meeting together. So.
And when these big corporate clients pulled their business because they're not having their meetings, there really isn't anything you can do, because even retreating to your premises, there is no one allowed to come to your shop.
That's right. So we have a studio that does the events, and we have a shop that does retail. And then obviously it's not safe to do retail at the moment. And the events, I expect, will be very long time before they pick up because of social distancing, which will continue for a very long time.
And both of you are self-employed in one way or another. You're a sole trader, Gail. We've heard about the package for employees of support from the United Kingdom government. What about for you? Peter, start with you.
Currently, universal credit stands at around £300 or £94 a week. If you can get through to them, if you could get an online application. There's no package as of yet, but there's supposedly a bill in the mix that will put us online with the PAYEs. Yet with people that have just come into that industry, how do they prove that they are self-employed in their previous wage? So it's going to decimate a lot of the new blood coming into the industry. And as for me, I just have to hope this package comes in.
Yeah. Gail, what have you heard?
Yeah, similarly, I'm hoping, like Peter, that the self-employed are going to get a similar package to the PAYE guys. A lot of the people in the event industry are self-employed, and that would give us a lot of security, and we would be then ready to, kick back in as soon as we can.
A lot of experts expect that this crisis is going to last for months. Gail, how are you going to manage for that period of time?
My main concern is my rent. I have a private landlord. I have a 5-year lease still to run, which I'm personally responsible for as a sole trader. It's a building which I cannot use. I don't expect my event work to pick up for at least 12 months, probably a bit longer. I'm going to have to reinvent in the short term. Small business owners are normally quite imaginative, quite creative, and we'll find a way.
Peter, if this crisis goes on for months, maybe a year even, how are you going to adapt, or are you going to have to change your career even?
Yeah, I mean, just like Gail said, we are inventive, we are robust, especially when you kind of live hand to mouth every month. But I've already started to reinvent myself. Like I said, online platforms have been the way forward in this time. Having a strong client base, and if you are a self-employed owner of any business, your rapport with your clientele is paramount. So that is helping me get through. But on a financial basis, I could probably survive 3 or 4 months before I would be getting myself into some kind of trouble.
Okay. Peter Bannister and Gail Smith, thank you very much for your contributions to the Nexus. Really appreciate it, and I wish you all the best going forward during this crisis. So let's go back to Dan in Seattle now. Dan, we've heard how Peter is adapting his business. I was just wondering, how are businesses adapting in Seattle?
Well, as you know, we have Pike Place Market here in Seattle, which is probably the most famous place here, the home of the first original Starbucks. But next door to that Starbucks is a Russian bakery called Piroshki. And the owner of that bakery, her name's Olga, she set up a delivery service not only to help her business, but all of her neighbors. And so she is now has a website, has payments, fully functional, and she's a longtime client of mine at Gravity Payments. And she is taking food and other goods that people need in this crisis from Pike Place Market directly to people's homes. And so people are doing what they can. Is it enough? Honestly, it's not for very long. It maybe extends their runway a little bit.
Seattle is very famous for entrepreneurs, as you mentioned, Starbucks, Amazon, Gravity Payments like yourself. If there was some silver lining here, it is forced people to rethink what they're doing with their lives and perhaps begin new businesses. Have you seen that in the previous crisis? Are you seeing that now?
You do see that a little bit, but here's the issue. If we had a good social safety net here, if we had universal basic income, if we had healthcare, if we had education and opportunities for caring for children, there would be enough of a safety net that people could adjust and people could start new businesses. And if we did those things, we would have really a revolution of small businesses and entrepreneurship. But because of the erosion of those public policy issues, the stakes are so high right now, it's really hard to take a risk. It's really hard to adjust your business. So some will make it. I don't want to say that they won't. And I encourage anybody that thinks that they can to go for it. But in terms of the numbers of entrepreneurs we need as a society to keep moving forward, I'm struggling to think that we're going to have enough. And instead, I think a lot of people are going to be caught in the financial crosshairs of the fallout from this crisis.
Well, Dan, you were the Young Entrepreneur of the Year back in 2010, a very prestigious prize. Let's have a look at the picture. There you are, being awarded the prize by President Barack Obama, no less. What advice would you give to young entrepreneurs right now who are in the middle of this nightmare?
If you have employees, I think you got to think about your employees first, because putting out your employees without a job in this situation could have disastrous ramifications if you think about the health consequences to them and their families. So that's first and foremost. Try to find a way to maintain your employees if you can, unless they have some sort of a social safety net to go to. Number one. Number two, do think about the fact that, yes, it is a good time to launch a product. It is a good time to do something because the world needs you more right now than ever before. The world needs you now way more than 2 or 3 months ago. So if you can stick with your integrity, if you can stick with serving and trying to make things better, the world needs you and you'll be able to make a bigger difference today than you ever have been.
Dan Price, thank you for that uplifting message. I really appreciate it. Very hopeful message in this rather dark time. Thank you so much for joining us on The Nexus, and thank you at home as ever for watching. Really appreciate it. Remember, you can catch this episode and all our previous episodes on the coronavirus on our channel on YouTube. Until next week then, goodbye.